myself. My name is Rosanna and I'm the Legislative Director for Congresswoman Nydia Velázquez, New York District 7. And I'm really thrilled to be here moderating this panel with just very distinguished guests, and particularly because this is my favorite topic to talk about, Puerto Rico. And just to be clear, this is the policy panel and there's other concurrent panels, so just to make sure that you're in the right spot, this is going to focus on policy. So at the core of implementing effective public policy is to be able to make sure that you take into account the needs of all the relevant stakeholders, and that's what makes implementing public policy so difficult, because you have to make sure that every need is met. That presents very unique challenges based on differences in political ideologies, affiliations, just upbringings, the list goes on. For Puerto Rico, we have to consider yet another layer of difficulty, and that's the lack of congressional representation. So our goal today is to make sure that you understand how policymaking is implemented at the highest levels of government, and by recognizing the process and all of the related stakeholders, we hope to ensure that through civic participation into the federal policymaking that we're able to ensure the future for Puerto Rico. So our discussion today is going to focus on three key questions. What do we know about our existing problems? What are we doing about them right now? And where do we go from here? What's our role after we leave the session today? What's each and every one of our roles? What's El Centro's roles? And of the different organizations that, that we represent. So within that framework, we hope to cover a lot of the current policy issues that are affecting the island today, which are a bunch of different issues. We hope to cover the public debt, energy issues on island, housing issues, infrastructure, the list goes on. And based on your questions, we could also take other issues. Obviously, an hour is not enough to cover all of the issues. So like I said, just be cognizant of that when you're asking questions. But that said, I'll briefly kick this off to my colleagues. Each will present for 3 to 5 minutes. And then after that, we'll open it up to questions. So with that said, I'd like to introduce our panelists. At the end, we have Mr. LeCompte, Executive Director of Jubilee USA. We have Ms. Gretchen Sierra-Zorita, Public Policy and Communication Strategist for the National Hispanic Foundation for the Arts, and Jennice Fuentes, founder of BoricuActivatEd. So thank you for being here today. Join me in welcoming them. So before Jennice talks about the congressional political landscape, you've heard this from Edwin, but just to reiterate, you all know Puerto Rico has been mired in a long-term economic recession. $70 billion in debt, $50 billion in unfunded pension liabilities, 37% of workforce participation, and a population decline of 12.8% since 2004. There's no doubt that Puerto Rico was facing some of the most difficult challenges that policymakers have to tackle at any given time. And then Hurricane Maria hit, and again, like Edwin was saying, that pretty much changed everything. All economic activity came to a halt and being completely shut off from communications, it was up to the federal government to step in and aid the 3.3 million Americans in Puerto Rico. So since then, Congress has approved $4.9 billion in community development loans, which we still haven't accessed just yet. But in addition to that, in the second round in the continuing resolution, it also included a disaster package that allocated specifically approximately $16 billion in recovery dollars for the island. So that's what we know. And we'll also now talk about, we'll shift it to Jennice, so she talks about, in addition to the money, what do we know about our friends in Congress, our not so friends in Congress, and just the political landscape in general. So with that, Jennice.
Thank you, Rosanna, and thank you, Centro and Edwin Melendez for his support, and because the work he does is absolutely somebody else doing what he does, so we're lucky. Oh, okay. I was saying that thank you, Centro and Rosanna, because the work that Centro does, it's pretty unique. In the, can you all hear me? No. Oh wow, I thought I had a strong voice. We have a sound problem. This is a microphone.
Is this a mic?
Hello.
It's a speaker. That's for the web.
So,
Okay, so
if I stand up.
yeah.
All right. So bigger than I do on that camera. All right. I'm gonna stand up. All right. So I'm gonna stand up like a teacher. So what do we know about the political landscape? Can you hear me better? Yes. I was thinking Edwin because I think it's important that we understand that what they do is really intrinsic to the reason what we know, what do we do, and where do we go from here. And he mentioned two things that are super important to the political landscape. One of them, and I wrote them down because they resonated with somebody like me who deals with the political landscape all the time. He talked about relationships, and he talked about accountability. If anybody reads the Nuevo Dia, the political landscape, you only need to read a Nuevo Dia or any other newspaper to know what the political landscape is in Congress regarding Puerto Rico. A mess, okay? It's a mess. It's a mess because we don't have the relationships, we haven't nurtured them, and we are not putting accountability. But that's for later, especially for the workshop tomorrow morning. We'll teach you how to bring accountability to the process. But if you look at a headline today, eliminating triple tax exemption has little traction. Okay. If you go down the story, there's two things that are really important to see there. Congressman Bishop, do we all know who he is? Yes. Please say yes. Yes. The chairman of the Powerful Committee on Natural Resources has jurisdiction in Puerto Rico. Do you all know who Congresswoman Mafia is?
Yes.
Maybe less, but some of you do. He's the chairman of the subcommittee that has jurisdiction in Puerto Rico. Okay. Powerful man, important man for Puerto Rico's fight and for our future. Men who are quoted in the newspaper today, not being aware of a GAO report that basically is suggesting that we should take out the triple tax exemption, something that our distinguished panelists will go into detail, for Puerto Rico, which will take Puerto Rico entirely out of the capital markets. And you'll know there's a Junta de Control Fiscal, right? There's a board that has that's responsible for the finances of the island. Yeah. And the board, and I know that the governor is putting up a fight with the board, but without taking any side, the board is the law. I'm not taking a side here. The board is the law. And the board isn't going anywhere until there's 4 balanced budgets. So the quicker we get the balanced budgets there, the quicker we get the board out of Puerto Rico. Right. So, right. So we need to get to that. But getting Puerto Rico back to the markets at the appropriate time and the appropriate way is super important. So those members of Congress were quoted today not knowing that the GAO report was suggesting that it's not criminal. That is unacceptable. And that is, in a nutshell, the political landscape as of this morning. Unacceptable. And something that will continue until we change that. Otra palabra que mencionó. Okay, relationships. And going back to the word because it's so important. What are we doing? Well, we're not doing enough. Those of you here are doing everything right because being here is part of that process. But it's what Edwin, because Edwin, I felt like he could have given this talk this morning because he talked exactly about the big points that my foundation, BoricuActivatEd, my nonprofit, and the work we're trying to do to get you, the diaspora, all of us to do. It's so important. The relationships with these members of Congress cannot be transactional. Who's married here? Raise your hands. Okay. Who's in a relationship? Who wants to be in a relationship? All of us have that in common, right? But you see, we all understand that. That's at a very basic level. You don't have transactional relationships with your wife, with your husband, with your girlfriend, or your boyfriend, girlfriend to be. That doesn't happen because that is not a way that we can actually build the pillars, the building blocks of a relationship of a family. We can't do that. None of us, well, maybe myself excluded, and some of us who do this for a living, have that. Because you cannot come to Congress, which is actually going to my, what are we doing and where do we go from here? Because that's my kind of stuff that we don't have. All of us, all of the members, I worked in Congress for 25 years, so I know something about what I'm talking about. A lot of people who should know better, and I mean everyone, who has his heart in the right place. From those who come in who are students who don't know a lot about how to engage with the elected officials, to doctors and lawyers and like businessmen who are super wealthy and educated and should know. Have the same thing in common. You must know how to engage. And you can only do that by building a relationship with that elected official and their staff. Like Rosanna staff for Nydia, I was staff for Torres. That is not transactional. Like if you're building a relationship with your boyfriend, girlfriend, you're not gonna call once a year or take them for dinner once a year. Or say, hey, I'm thinking about you today, and that happens once a year. That's impossible. So if that's impossible for you to have a relationship with somebody based on that, how do you think Puerto Rico is going to get the $17 billion it needs to rebuild itself if we only go to Congress once a year, once a month? No, impossible. This has to be a drumbeat. You need to be there every week. I don't mean in person to learn that you come to more to my workshop. But you can develop a real relationship with that staffer because I was a staffer for 25 years. Rosanna's a staffer for a few years now. Some of us here may have been serving some local state elected officials. We're real people. We're normal people who care. So it's building that relationship that where we have to go from here. Because without those relationships, stop being transactional and becoming real relationships with you, exchange information, and you look at people in the eye and you tell them, you know, Puerto Rico really needs you to understand what happened where we were before Maria, what happened during Maria, where all of us have losses, and what happened after Maria, and how do we go from here as U.S. citizens? We demand their attention. And the two members I just mentioned, for example, just to finish on that, the two members I mentioned, estamos por toda parte. The Puerto Ricans are everywhere, and I think that Congress needs to understand that. La Malpa has 1,577 members of Congress in this district. That is actually
Puerto Ricans, you said.
He's in California.
Oh, pardon. Okay.
And Congressman Bishop, my dear Congressman Bishop, that nice gentleman from Utah, first district, he has more than 3,000 Puerto Ricans in this district. For Utah and Puerto Ricans, that is not an insignificant amount. And just to do my little, polling that I love to do, I called this morning. Alumni and said, hey, have you heard from any constituents in your district? And much to my great surprise, yes, one called yesterday. I said, that's actually good. We start somewhere, right? One called yesterday. But the idea is that those Puerto Ricans in those districts have to become engaged. At least one of them in Utah is doing so. So having said that, just remember that it's about the relationships not being transactional. Thank you.
Buenos días a todo el mundo. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, gracias por venir. Gracias, repito lo que dijo Jennice, a Centro, a Edwin Meléndez. Yo a veces pienso que si el no existiera no había diáspora, porque no tendríamos manera de comunicarnos y de vernos los unos a los otros. Quiero hablar de muchas cosas, así que voy a hablar bien rapidito. We're supposed to be in English. Okay, there we go. Okay. Talking about Congress and the challenges that we face in Congress. And I want to talk about something else. I want to talk to you about how local policies make our advocacy work at the federal level so much harder, okay? And these are policies that take place in Puerto Rico that create situations where transparency, accountability, and integrity is questioned by the people who hold the strings of the federal purse and people that are in positions to help Puerto Rico. So they're less prone to help us. And this is why I think it's important that the diaspora and people in Puerto Rico as well understand that what happens in Puerto Rico matters over here. Now, I'm not very sure what the diaspora can do as such without stepping over bounds. We don't live in Puerto Rico. We don't vote in Puerto Rico. So it's really up to the people of Puerto Rico to take actions on these particular programs and policies that are happening right now in Puerto Rico. Thanks to the free press, what happens in Puerto Rico does not stay in Puerto Rico. And we hear about it, and these things do have repercussions. And so we have to be aware of that. And the other thing we need to be aware of is that we're being held to a higher standard than the other 50 states. I do believe that in many disasters around the nation, there have been other whitewaters, okay? Ours is not the only one. These things do happen. However, over 6 months after the hurricane, we're still hearing in Congress about what happened with Whitewater. Whitewater was the other one, right? Okay, yeah, okay, Whitefish. Okay, and because we are held to a higher standard, and that is the fact we have to step up the game, okay? Both here and in Puerto Rico. So with that, I want to tell you about a couple of things that are going on in Puerto Rico that people over here do know about, and people over here are talking about, and it's really important. The first thing is the Energy Commission, okay? The Puerto Rico Utility Company is, there's a plan to privatize it. What they're going to do is the government is going to sell off the generation capacity, and then they're going to lease through private partnerships the distribution network, okay? There is, every state in the union has an energy commission that regulates the utility, and the commission and the government is out of this relationship. That's the way it's done in the rest of the world. In Puerto Rico, we've had an energy commission for about 2 years, and as we're looking forward to the privatization process, the plan is to keep the commission out of the process of the contracting or the leasing. They will not be able to oversee or monitor that, and they will use it in a technical capacity, as technical assistance, so to speak. And so, as you can imagine, this runs completely counter to the notion of having a commission that regulates what kind of energy is produced, how is it being produced, is it clean, is it cheap, will it satisfy the needs of the public, will it satisfy the needs of manufacturing, and such things. So you get the picture. Another issue that's very similar, and by the way, this issue has been raised by so many people here in the United States. Another issue that is very, very similar is the Institute of Statistics of Puerto Rico. Again, this institute is about 10 years old. It was created because there's no statistical data gathering capacity in Puerto Rico, and because we are not covered by federal government by and large. There are lots of government agencies at the federal level that collect data. Puerto Rico oftentimes is not part of it. I just want to give you one little statistic on this, which is the U.S. Census Bureau statistical programs amount to 75 programs. Of those 75 programs, Puerto Rico is included in only 11 of them. So if you don't think you need a statistical institute, think again. The idea is to subsume it under the Department of Economic Development and Commerce, and so it lacks its independence, and to contract some of the things it currently does. The notion is they will save money. Well, the institute has a budget of about $2 million. The government of Puerto Rico just signed a contract with GW, George Washington University, for $1.3 million. To study the issue of the death of Marias. So is it really a financial issue? I don't think so. There's also this notion that if these functions are privatized, they will be depoliticized. The only way to have a politicized situation is by having independent institutions that oversee the processes of governance and lead to good governance. I'm going to give you 3 more quick ones because I know my 5 minutes are almost up, but the other ones are FOIA. The governor of Puerto Rico has an executive order to designate somebody to create a freedom of information laws in Puerto Rico. Every single state has FOIA laws, meaning that you have access to information. In Puerto Rico, that is a constitutional right, but the agencies still make it very difficult for the public to get to that information. So one of the ways they have to do it is they have to go to court, which is really not the most efficient way to have transparency. And for instance, the Center for Investigative Journalism very recently sued the Demographic Register because they were not giving information of the death of Maria. We need to have FOIA laws in Puerto Rico to have transparency. The other area that a lot of you know about, and now my index cards are all over the place, is contracts. We all know the story of contracts in Puerto Rico. There's not uniformity, there's not regularity, and therefore they're very hard to monitor. Between September and December, half of the contracts issued in Puerto Rico in 2017, post-Maria, had nothing to do with emergency. It is very difficult to regulate. We need standards, we need accountability, we need the agencies in Puerto Rico to come up to speed. A lot of the entries in the agencies of purchases are made by hand. The computer programs have different softwares and are not integrated. And this is why you do not know what the left hand and the right hand is doing. And finally, the other issue that we have in Puerto Rico continues to be the civil service. In the 1940s, the civil service and education was a way to educate people for people who acquire upward mobility, to train them into their jobs. There were entrance exams, there was training, and so forth. In the 1970s, the entrance exams were dropped. We started hiring more political employees, more contract employees, and as a result of this, and this is a staggering figure, in 2012, Puerto Rico had 9,009 political appointees. Empleados de confianza, no es the term they use. In the U.S. for the federal government, there are 3,653 political appointees. We know what this happens in terms of continuity, in terms of politicization. I do not know how the diaspora can help with this matter, but we have talked this morning about sectoral approaches and group-to-group relationships, and maybe that may be one of the ways that we can help people in Puerto Rico, institutions like Espacios Abiertos, which deals with these issues like el Centro Investigativo de Periodismo, to make it a more transparent, freedom to give governance, so that when we go to Congress, nobody says, oh, but we heard about this contract, but we heard about the situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gretchen. My name is LeCompte. I work with Jubilee USA. Jubilee USA is a coalition of religious, labor, political advocacy groups founded by a range of organizations from the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops to the Presbyterian Church and large Jewish and Muslim consortiums. We've been working on debt and financial issues for 20 years, and our work has resulted in relief of over $130 billion in debt for some of the world's poorest economies. I've been asked to speak a little bit about civic engagement after hearing from our experts about what the landscape is and where we go from here. Before I jump into that, I do want to acknowledge that here with me today is Reverend Roberto Martinez from Puerto Rico, who leads the Ecumenical Interfaith Coalition on the Debt and working with us since 2015, and Ignacio Gonzalez, a part of that coalition. These were some of the first voices in 2015 before the world knew there was a great financial crisis taking place in Puerto Rico, and the ones, along with Archbishop Gonzalez, that raised the alarm. Civic engagement is absolutely important, and the only way that we've seen progress over the past few years, and that we'll continue to see progress, is that we push the levers to make change happen. Because of the work that we've done, we have one relief aid, not enough, but we're about 30 billion to the 90 billion that we need. So we need to continue working on that. We've won better building provisions so that when Puerto Rico rebuilds, they can rebuild to withstand the next storm. We've won portions of healthcare and Medicaid financing. We've moved forward a super bankruptcy process. And all of these things that have happened have only happened because there has been engagement with political decision makers. In terms of where we need advocacy now, in terms of where civic engagement is needed now, today, in this moment, I would assert that there are 5 buckets, 5 different places that we need to influence, that we need to interact with, if we want to continue to move forward a promising future for the people of Puerto Rico. The first bucket is the creditors. The second bucket is the U.S. Congress. The third bucket is the governor and oversight board. The fourth bucket is the governor of New York and the New York State Legislature. And the fifth and final bucket, which I call our Obi-Wan Kenobi moment, is the bankruptcy process that continues to go forward. So in terms of these areas, just to give a few examples, this is the Cliff Note version of my comments. We can get more into the discussion. All 5 of these groups need to hear actively from us. And all of these groups, all 5 of these groups can be moved if we put pressure on them, if we speak to them, if we engage with them. The first group is the creditors. And when I say the creditors, that's a lot of different groups in there. But there are some creditors that have been more predatory in nature, that have tried to take more advantage of Puerto Rico. And those creditors need to be named, and there needs to be actions, there needs to be voices. And some of those creditors are invested in major education institutions, or rather hold the investments of major education institutions. So many folks have heard about some of the recent work that Yale students have done in terms of focusing on creditors. A place that's gotten far less action that needs to hear more is Harvard University. Harvard's endowment, Harvard's teacher pensions are also invested with Baupost, which was found to be having secretive investments with Seth Klarman. And that's just an example of a creditor that can move to public pressure. So we need to look at these pressure points, such as Harvard continuing to invest with creditors in Puerto Rico that have had untransparent behavior. The second group is Congress, and there's a lot that needs to happen, and if focus doesn't continue with Puerto Rico on Congress, we will not see continued movement. As noted, we still have a lot more to do in terms of getting the rest of the relief and rebuilding aid that we need. Now, one of the things about the legislation that passed is there were processes in the legislation to come back to Congress for more requests of aid. So the reality is there is some process in there, but we need to push hard in order to continue to get that aid. And I think just by comparison, if we look at other natural disasters that have taken place on the mainland in U.S. states, relief and rebuilding aid was never won in one moment. It happened continually, often over a period of years, to the point where even now in New Orleans, they're drawing on funds that was won much, much later. So this isn't about a few months of work, it's not about 6 months of work. This is about years of work to ensure that we get the full amount of money that the people of Puerto Rico need to rebuild. We need to finish our work on the bipartisan recommendations in Congress. And one of the things that came out of the PROMESA legislation was it brought a group of Republicans and Democrats together who said if we want economic growth, if we want to reduce child poverty on the island, we need to do a few things. We need to make sure that people that live in Puerto Rico get the same access to healthcare financing that people who live on the mainland get. We need to be sure that people in Puerto Rico get access to child tax benefits, just as people on the mainland get. And then something which wasn't as much about this, but certainly related, is we need to be sure there are punitive tax measures on the people of Puerto Rico that aren't on people on the mainland. This all together results in tens of billions of dollars in future years that Puerto Rico needs. This is work that we can continue to move forward in the next year, and it's absolutely crucial that Congress hears from us on this. The last point about Congress, and this brings us to our next bucket, is talking about the Oversight Board and the governor. I think, unfortunately, except for Nydia Velázquez and Jose Serrano, Congress has been largely silent on the fiscal plan, the newest version of the fiscal plan. And both Republicans and Democrats have a lot of concerns with those fiscal plans, but hardly any of them have spoken up. We've seen them at hearings be way too courteous over the last few weeks. And that helped to allow a very dangerous fiscal plan to move forward and impose on the people of Puerto Rico. So it's absolutely urgent right now that we move members of Congress to tell the Oversight Board and governor that they're thinking about paying more debt to creditors post-hurricane, when before the hurricane they were going to pay less debt, is incredibly problematic. So those messages we need to move Congress to get to the Oversight Board. And in particular, one message that we know Republican leadership and Republican partners have been very concerned with is we pass all this relief money and aid for Puerto Rico. We pass tranches of the healthcare money that Puerto Rico needs. And we believe that that money, some of that money, is now going to be used to pay creditors. 25 cents on the dollar was the last fiscal plan in terms of how much money was going to be paid to creditors. Now it's 40 cents on the dollar. Now, along with rosy projections that the New York Fed disagrees with, the reality is that money is coming from U.S. federal taxes to pay creditors. And that's a message that every member of Congress needs to hear, and every Republican member of Congress wants to hear. The third point is the Governor and Oversight Board. And I won't say much on this, other than that they are both susceptible to public pressure. And that both of these entities, I believe in recent months, even though I believe there are some good people involved, have done a disservice to the people of Puerto Rico. So they need to hear from us. And we need to understand that there's still an ongoing process that we can influence. Even though this awful fiscal plan came out, the next thing that comes up is the plan of adjustment or plans of adjustment. Those are things we can influence over the next few months, that we can put pressure on, and we have a civic responsibility to do so in order to ensure that the fiscal plan is implemented in ways that is least harmful and can be more positive for the people of Puerto Rico. The fourth bucket is a bucket that we at Jubilee have been working on for 3 years, mostly quietly until about 6 months ago. And that's that the New York State Legislature and the Governor of New York have the ability to help us move forward some legislative remedies to protect the people of Puerto Rico. 51% of the world's market debt, all debt, so whether we're talking about Puerto Rico, Guam, Zambia, El Salvador, Grenada, 51% of the world's market debt is under New York state law. So the majority of Puerto Rico's debt is not under New York state law, but there is a certain bond, the general obligation bond, which our work for Puerto Rico started in Argentina and Grenada, if that makes any sense. And that's because for more than a decade, we've been battling a group known as vulture funds, predatory hedge funds. And we've stopped them and challenged them in different places. We've lost to them as we lost to them in Argentina. But where they wanted to go after Argentina was Puerto Rico. And what they did in the state of New York is they were able to get the new sexy bond offering of the general obligation bond, nicknamed the hedge fund bond, to not be under Puerto Rican law, but to be under New York state law. And the reason that they did that is because the precedents in the Argentina case favor the creditors. So they want to be able to sue under New York law, but that also means that we can change New York law. So by the fall, we hope to introduce legislation that will essentially not only affect Puerto Rico, but affect almost every country in the world from being protected from debt burdens and predatory behavior. So it's very significant. And we invite you to be a part of that. And the great thing is New York, you know, so not only is the Puerto Rican diaspora here, but the diaspora that's affected by these policies all over the world, from Jamaica to Dominican Republic to Zambia, are all here in New York. So we're looking forward to move forward that fourth bucket. The fifth bucket, in terms of civic engagement, that I just wanted to note, is what I believe is our Obi-Wan Kenobi moment. And that's the reality that even as good things and bad things are happening all around us in terms of Puerto Rico, something is continuing very quietly behind the scenes. And that's the super bankruptcy process under Judge Laura Taylor Swain. The first time that we expect to see her really publicly react will be after the plans of adjustment are released, since at the end of the day, this all falls under what her decisions are. She needs to get letters from us. She needs to get petitions from us. She is meeting with stakeholders here in New York State. It's absolutely imperative that we treat her as an elected official and we reach out to her and let her know about the suffering that's taking place in Puerto Rico, that we let her know how problematic it is that the Oversight Board passed a fiscal plan that is worse than the pre-hurricane fiscal plan. So these 5 buckets are buckets that we believe are the ones that as civic engagers we need to engage. The creditors, Congress, the Governor Oversight Board, the bankruptcy process itself, and the New York State Legislature and Governor. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. So that was a lot of ground to cover, and we have approximately 15 minutes for Q&A. You do have in your index cards. Please write your questions down in the index cards, and we'll try to go through them all. Just while you do that, I'll start off with one question related to the debt, because that's not necessarily something that we're all immersed in. And just as an explanatory note, you talked about the plan of adjustment being the next important milestone. Can you talk about, one, what a plan of adjustment is, and two, the timeline around it vis-a-vis the board's terms?
Right. So in terms of plans of adjustment, there's a fiscal plan that now has been approved by the Oversight Board. That fiscal plan is being posed by the governor. I think we're looking at perhaps a court process, which we don't think is necessarily a good idea in any case. But in terms of that fiscal plan, in terms of implementing that plan, then there are plans of adjustment. And different plans of adjustment will do different things. So if the fiscal plan continues to see that there is less money for the university, for example, what the plan of adjustment in relation to that will do is look to adjust the funds that go to the university. So it's actually the implementation element, if that makes sense. And so that's another element along the way that can be influenced. There was a second question. I'm not sure.
What is the plan of adjustment?
What is the plan of adjustment? So, and in terms of, I guess, well, the terms of the current oversight board, I think it is important to note that it's unclear what direction the oversight board is going in. It's certainly possible that the oversight board itself could try and restructure the debt, come to an agreement with the creditors, and get agreement from the judge to do so. We believe if they did do that, the judge would be very likely to approve whatever plan they came up with. I think the pressure that the current oversight board members are under, no matter what their intention is that their terms are up now in about a year. So we will have a new oversight board that is appointed by the current president of the United States.
Unless they're nominated.
Yeah, they certainly can be renominated. I would be very surprised if any of these oversight board members want to stay for another term.
Well, and to that case, a lot has been said about, and I'm not taking any sides here, but a lot has been said about the salaries of the oversight board. I would just note that only the executive director and the revitalization coordinator do get paid. All these other positions are on a pro bono basis, so you're right, they probably do not want to extend their tenure.
And it'll be very hard to find somebody who does want to extend it.
Well, in the learning curve, I mean, we've been working on Puerto Rico for many years now, but there is a very steep learning curve as to all the different issues that are affecting the island. So I think to the points that were made earlier, this antagonism between the government of Puerto Rico and the oversight board is not helpful because it delays the process. And throughout that time frame, we have, I think what they mentioned in Carrion's letter was 1.4 billion in litigation fees because there's so many lawyers involved in the process. If we do, if we extend this process, imagine the billions of dollars that Puerto Rico will continue to spend. So just wanted to touch in on that. Do we have any questions?
Can I say something about the issue of the governor and the board? Because I think this is something that I wish people would understand. People tend to criticize what the governor is doing, and people, or what the governor is doing, what Jennifer Gonzalez is doing, what Carmen Yulín is doing, and they take sides, And we need to see, and I agree with what Rosanna said about the relationship within the governor and the board, that these three individuals are running for some type of political position for a governorship, someday, or, they have political aspirations. And so this is the dynamic that we're seeing. But I think what we need to understand is to step back and say, okay, so they're all doing these things, but let them play their roles. In my mind, the governor is the guy, I'm thinking at the federal level, the guy that has to make the peace with the federal government and the administration and the White House, because he's in that position. I think Carmen Yulín is in the position to, make noise and criticize and agitate, And then I think Representative Gonzalez a position to build bridges to the Republicans. So instead of seeing these individuals as the contestants that they are, and that they want us to see them as, and they want us to root for their specific position, let's try to see them holistically and realize that each one of them has a role to play, is playing it, and we need good cop, bad cop, and in-between cop for these things. And let's step out from their political contest and see, okay, this could work, and try not to take sides, because I do think you have to look at it that way.
Okay, so all very good questions. I hope we have time to cover all of them, but I do want to touch on an issue that we haven't expanded upon just yet, and it's essential to Puerto Rico's long-term strategy and recovery, and that is how can the Puerto Rican diaspora promote the transformation of the Puerto Rican energy grid toward community-based solar. And this is more coming from the perspective of, instead of a centralized energy grid that's managed by the government, how can we get a grassroots operation to power up the communities? Do we have any takers?
I'll take a stab, and you can take a big stab because you know a lot about this too. What?
You have to speak louder, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll take a stab, but Rosanna actually knows an awful amount about this, so she should take a stab out of it too. It is very, and there are people in the room, you know, who know an awful lot about this too. I find it very frustrating, the situation that we are at, where we are moving towards redoing our energy grid post-Maria, and enough space is not giving for the right decisions to be made. And so this whole, I'm not against privatization per se, but I am against privatization if it's going to lead to a private monopoly, or if it's not going to take into account consumer rates, the rate for electricity rates, and also for manufacturing, not just consumer. And if it's not going to take into account those resources that are available to us that long-term could be cheaper, like renewable resources, okay? So in that concern, I am against privatization, but privatization for other, per se, I don't have a problem with it. But given that we're in that area, I feel very frustrated, and my only suggestion is to build your bridges directly to the sectorial sector and to the people that are dealing with it on the ground through the universities, through things like Casa Pueblo, with things like El Puente. We have somebody here, organizations that are dealing with these grid issues, and try to bring your bridges directly to the civic sector and to the and to the non-governmental sector, because personally, you know, what's his name, de Casa Pueblo, talks about an energy revolution or something, or uprising or something. I'm part of some energy uprising, I'm not sure what it is. But I think it has to come from the people, bottom up, because it's not going to be delivered by the government, because there are too many competing interests, amongst other paying the debt. And that, you know, it's not only sold, the PREPA is not only being sold because it's decrepit, it's also being sold to make money, okay? And the current law that's being considered said that consideration from the proceeds will be given to, handed off to the pensioners, but it's not written in the law. It's just kind of like a, maybe we'll do it. So I think my only advice is, go directly to the non-government sector and see what alliances you can build. Rosanna, you know so much about this.
No, I would agree with what you just mentioned. I think that in order to create that revolution, we could look at existing communities that have already done this. Casa Pueblo is a great example. There's another one in Salinas, Coquí.
Yeah.
They have made sure that they insulate themselves from any external pressures, changes in federal policy, changes in oil prices right now with getting back from the Iran deal. That's definitely going to increase oil prices. We are the entity that feels the most hardship on that. I believe it was in 2011. Our energy rates were at 29 cents per kilowatt. That's 2.5 times more than the average in the US, where it was at 9. We definitely have to shift away from fossil fuels. It is not only a limited resource, but we've seen how other countries have been able to focus on renewable energies and have made it work. And it creates a sense of not only building on the capacity that we already have. If countries like Rotterdam in the Netherlands that don't have as much exposure to sunlight are shifting to renewable energies and to solar grids, why can't Puerto Rico? I think the only problem there is that the majority of the stakeholders that have a lot of political influence, a lot of monetary influence, are from the fossil fuel industries. If you look at all of the industrial revolution, if you trace back the money, it all goes to these big oil companies. So that is why it's so important to get civic society engaged in what you really want. Build energy cooperatives, not just the existing cooperatives in the financial sector, build upon that to energy cooperatives, to agricultural cooperatives. But it has to come from us. We can no longer stay back and not really claim what we need for economic recovery. So that's on energy. This next question is on the debt. Many claim that part of the debt is odious. Is this accurate? Is the first question. And if so, how much of the debt could or should be removed if the debt is considered illegal? Is Jubilee supporting an investigation into how much of the debt is legal? So Eric, this one's for you.
You know, I think there's a lot happening with the debt in Puerto Rico, and certainly from our point of view, there are parts of the debt that should be investigated in terms of how they were contracted. Was the debt used for what it was supposed to be used? Do we have an actual position on a certain percentage is odious or illegitimate? I mean, those are fun words, and they're words I don't like to use very often, but essentially what those words mean is that the debt or the bonds, the money was misappropriated, and the money was not used for what it was supposed to be used. Certainly, there has also been a high level of corruption among some of the creditors and within the government of Puerto Rico. So we do believe that there should be investigations of the debt. We were supportive of a full audit process, and I think one of the really important things that we moved forward in the PROMESA legislation was a protection of the multi-stakeholder audit committee. But unfortunately, that committee's funding was dissolved by the government of Puerto Rico. There are different processes happening within the bankruptcy process and different filings that have taken place. There have also been civil society investigations and research that is done into portions of the debt. But at this point, without an official audit or an official investigation that's made public from the bankruptcy process, we cannot know at what level some of the debt might be illegitimate or odious.
Thank you. So looking at the time, we have 5 more minutes. I'm going to take one more question because I think it's important for all of you to hear.
Rosanna, let them choose between like good Puerto Rican food or questions, because we can overstay a little bit.
We can do that as well. And honestly, if you don't hear responses to your questions, we can stay behind as well.
Because they might want to stay a little bit longer. Yeah.
But I think this one is important because it's talking about resources, existing resources, and where to find them. This is a little towards what Eric was mentioning before on letters of support. So you're asking for letters of support, advocacy to support legislative processes. So they need bankruptcy papers, summary of the issues that are affecting the island, the different legislations that are being proposed and circulated on the Hill, and plans of actions. So I think a stab at where we can find resources. I think the bankruptcy papers are slightly harder. The court documents are slightly harder, but if anybody wants to take a stab at this.
Centro has a good website. What? And Center for the New Economy has a good website. Centro here has a good website. We all read news constantly. I read thematically. So I read along the lines of Puerto Rico. I adjust my Twitter feed to the lines of Puerto Rico. And a lot of these things come in the press. I can't really, other than Centro and Center for the Economy, I can't think of, I'm a member of something called the National Puerto Rican Agenda, which you guys have heard about. Their social media pages are constantly putting on things that are on topics of interest to Puerto Rico. I also run another one that's called Puerto Rico en Serio that has the same type of thing. BoricuActivatEd also has, we run constant news feeds of issues that are important, but there's not, you have to become kind of a Puerto Rico reader. And I have to tell you, I was a complete mayor in college. I barely read books anymore because, I am completely immersed in the subject, and there's not an easy way to do it. Oh, I would like though, yes. This book by Jorge Duani is a great book, not for what's going on now, but in terms of, how we got here, and it's not biased, it's academic, and it's very easy to read. I've been giving it to public libraries, actually, so I want to make a plug for that, okay?
What you need to know about Puerto Rico, I will have it too.
Puerto Rico, what everyone needs to know by Jorge Duani, okay? It's just a really great basic primer.
So I would also just offer, if you're looking for a template or an action alert on all of the various pieces I outlined that Congress needs to hear, you're going to find an action alert and a template on our website, jubileeusa.org. It's in English and in Spanish, and you can use that to send to your members of Congress. You're also going to see at jubileeusa.org how to look at these issues in terms of trying to move forward policy before the next hurricane season begins, which actually begins in just a few weeks. And then the other piece about the bankruptcy judge,
the bankruptcy judge is a really interesting person, and so far her public statements, I would say, generally are very supportive of Puerto Rico. She doesn't need to hear complicated analysis. What she needs is human stories about suffering. That's really what she needs to hear, and she needs to know that we feel that the oversight board and the governor have been on the wrong track on this, and that people are suffering, and she has a responsibility to ease that suffering. It's a simple message, but that's what Judge Laura Taylor Swain needs to hear.
I like to add about social media, because Edwin talked about social media, and there's nothing more true than that. So those of you who are on Facebook, BoricuActivate without the ED, BoricuActivate has a Facebook page, and we try to stay current with not only what's happening in Congress and what's important that you know about, but we often post scripts and suggest, if you want to engage with your elected official, to what to say when you call, etc. So, but when you all come tomorrow to the workshop between 9 and 11, you'll know much more about that.
And the same for the National Puerto Rico Agenda. If you're not already part of it, whenever we do campaigns of advocacy, we use those emails, to get out materials and to get out information. So that's another organization.
So just to be cognizant of people's times, it is 12:30, so there will be lunch served. If you want to stay behind, we're happy to do that as well.
Let's do one more
I'm
question.
just going to go through the remaining 2 questions. This one's for Eric. The Trump tax cut includes a provision that would tax commodity exports from Puerto Rico. What is the status of that provision, and are there any efforts to challenge it?
Yeah, it's the ideological bit. So actually, this is probably really good for Rosanna to actually answer. I mean, the only thing that I would say before she gives a more complete answer is there have been commitments on both sides of the aisle to repeal it, but there's been little action from our point of view on it.
Yeah, I think the only provision that was done to help Puerto Rico, quote unquote, Puerto Rico with this new tax plan, and I wouldn't call it the Trump tax cut because I don't really think it's a cut, but that's my own ideological view, was the economic opportunity zones that was introduced by Jennifer Gonzalez.
Yeah.
The economic opportunity zones, however, I like to compare it to the hub zones from the Small Business Administration. You could designate, and Promesa did that, designated the whole island as a hub zone. Mm-hmm. Well, that's great if you have the demand for hub zone contracts. Likewise, you can designate the whole island as an opportunity zone to increase investment on island, but where is that investment coming from? I think to the complete opposite, and this goes back to this grassroots approach to energy, we have to make sure that we promote domestic investment on island, not foreign. We have an economic development administration that is constantly doing forums, that is spending a lot of the taxpayer from Puerto Rico money on conferences to attract foreign investment. There is a lot of money on island as well. There's a very large elite class that has money and can invest on the island. So I kind of deviated slightly from there, but then to answer the question, the only thing right now that was being done to help Puerto Rico is the economic opportunities.
Can I deviate you further?
And one second, just to finish the thought. From what I'm hearing on the Hill, and I'm hearing on Puerto Rico all the time, there is no other provision that's being considered at this point. So.
To deviate you a little bit further, I am not offended if people want to come from the outside and invest in Puerto Rico, whether they're from the mainland or from Latin America. What I find it problematic is when Puerto Ricans are excluded from whatever enterprise they're creating in the island. And what I find, and this is a real deviation that I'm going to take, is when not only are we not part of the process of job creation and ownership and so forth, but, I hate using this term, but we're selling off our assets. And this I find really trouble. This happened this week. A catalog came up in the newspaper, thank God for the free press, of properties that are put up in for sale in Puerto Rico. And somehow Icacos got into that list, okay? Now, ¿cuál fue la otra? Y las ratones. It has been since retracted by the government, but the fact that there was somebody in some office that thought that it was okay to put Icacos on this list, to me is outrageous. Now, since then, somebody identified 17 of these properties are part of natural reserves. So I don't have problems with investments, but I have problems with investment that are simply there to take off an asset and generate money without any political provocation, and let alone assets that are natural resources. And I'm gonna give you one more scary story. In Washington this week, there was a conference, which I wish I had attended, but I was already in New York, on what's called private cities, where you go and you buy land, you set up a private city. And of course, if you're a private city, you can tell who lives in the private city. Well, there's a group that is contemplating this idea, and the area they're contemplating is Roosevelt Roads. I have problems with that, and I am not a person who is against foreign investment, and I am more capitalist than the capitalist, and it's none of that. There's nothing ideological in my thinking. But Puerto Rico is for Puerto Ricans to prosper and grow, not to be sold so somebody else can make money off of it.
To end that thought, and again, it's not against privatization if it's done in the right way, but always remember, and this is something that they teach you in like policy school, the private sector can be very efficient in a lot of things that they do. There's no doubt about that. This is why we've become so successful in innovation and technology. They can be very efficient, but they have absolutely no incentive to do public good. And yes, Prepa right now is the biggest asset that we have. It's inefficient, of course, but it's the biggest asset that we have, and that should remain for the people. I have one more question.
I'm sorry, but could you clarify what you just said?
What do you mean about
The biggest
private
asset.
sector?
The biggest asset. What are you saying?
Well, because it generates energy, which is at the core of daily life. It is what runs. I mean, we saw it after Nydia. Because they didn't have electricity, you don't have access to clean water, to hospitals. You don't have access to anything. It is a huge public asset. That is what controls the lives of every single citizen. So that's
But you shouldn't sell.
I'm sorry.
The problem with that is what you were just saying, that they're taking all our history and the land and just selling it. And the government is not getting anything, losing natural resources. And
That's why you need an energy commission to regulate all of that. With an energy commission, you can regulate that and you can monitor that. You know, just because you sell it, it doesn't mean that. I mean, we have private utilities in this country all over the place. They're regulated.
I'm not just talking about, okay. I'm just talking about privatization in general. You know, the selling of our heritage and our everything, and not protecting the people in the island. There are a lot of expertise that we have.
No, I would agree with you 100%. So I'm getting the signal that we have to cut the session, but I want to thank you for participating today.